Καλησπέρα σας.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Well, I would like to welcome our speakers and the participants on the massacre of Distomo. I would like to thank the mayor, Ioannis Stathas, who will have the floor for just a brief greeting. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you all for being here today in the third session of this conference. Representatives from Lidice, Michalis Liberatos, Giorgos Margaritis, who have been assisting us with the National Council, and of course, along with the network of smarter cities and villages. This is the first conference focusing on this Distomo massacre, and we hope that next year we will all be present at Distomo to honor our dead, and of course your dead as well from other cities of Europe. And hopefully the pandemic will be over next year and we will have the opportunity to meet in person. It is a great honor to have you all here with us. Next year, we will be with us and we will try to have a wider audience because I think that technology limits us. If we will have a live conference, we will be able to have more participants and the opportunity to exchange points of view, ideas, and of course, fight against Nazism. We need to understand that Nazism is not something that has passed. It is omnipresent, it is here, and by keeping our memory alive, we will be able to struggle against it all the time. We need to keep our memories alive in order to avoid repeating these unfortunate historical events of World War II. Thank you all once again, and each and everyone in person, and hopefully next year we will be at Distomo in person.
Ευχαριστώ και πάλι.
I would like to thank the mayor. This is the third session, Nazi war crimes against humanity, historical context and places of memory in the framework of the Distomo Remembrance Day 77 years ago, and the Nazi war crimes against humanity. We need to remember that not only in Greece, but all over the world, villages and towns experienced violence from the SS. The massacre at Distomo were about 228, 117 women, 111 men, and 53 children under the age of 9. The violence was so extreme that they just stopped when everybody was dead. I also come from a village that has not been remunerated for these crimes, and I would like to cite the memories of Argyris Soudouris, who was at the age of 4. Now they come to us. I can hear their boots on the yard. They don't come up. Our father comes down to prevent them from entering the house. I can hear his steps as he goes down, and I remember his words. We need to be quiet and hidden. The father did not say goodbye because he wanted to make us feel comfortable that we will see him again. Well, I could see a big convoy outside the yard, and a soldier sees us and tells us in a way to go away and hide. we want to go to our grandparents at the corner of the square before the spring. We saw our father. I tried to hang him, but nobody, they don't allow me to. I could see some holes, red holes on his skull. Probably these kinds of wounds cannot heal. My father is dead. So Argyris is a person who has been trying for the reparations all these years, but without being heard by the authorities. He is the one who in 2015 appeared in the German TV station, spoke in German and described all his experiences from childhood when the Germans massacred the whole village. And the people who were attending the show applauded Argyris, and they told him that they were not aware of all these atrocities. Yes, all these memories and atrocities have been hidden for all these years. And that is what we are going to talk about today, about the historical context and places of memory, because memory is of paramount importance when we want to prevent this kind of atrocities in the future. And we all have to picture this young boy looking at the red balls on the face of his father, thinking that these wounds will never close. His father won't be back. Everything after that became ashes. And now we have too few survivors. Justification and justice 77 years after has not been awarded. There is this museum for the Nazi victims. And of course, we have this picture of Maria, one of the survivors of the massacre. And with this, I would like to invite the first speaker, Mr. Giorgos Margaritis, Professor of Modern and Contemporary History, Department of Politics and Sciences, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Mr. Margaritis studied in the University of Nice in France in 1981. He became a professor. He teaches contemporary and modern history. In the previous 20 years, he worked as a professor of history in the philosophical school of the University of Crete. He has been presented in many conferences, and he has published a lot of articles regarding the Nazi war crimes and the resistance in Greece. In 2015, he was a candidate MP with the Communist Party. Mr. Margaritis, you've got the floor, and he will talk to us about Nazis.
Good afternoon to you and to all the participants, viewers, attendees of this event. I'd like to start by thanking the Distomo Museum of the Holocaust and the mayor himself, not just for this honoring invitation he addressed to me in order to take part in this conference, but also for their efforts to keep the spirit of this claim alive, the claim of the reparations and the spirit of resistance against what the powerful ones dictate over our country, against law, against the law that should apply to our people. For all these things, we should thank Distomo and the people there, the mayor, the museum, for all this great effort of theirs. June 10th, 1944, German occupation troops, executed in cold blood 228 people, civilians, as the military would say. Some tens of people in neighboring countries were also executed during the multi-day operations by the Germans. Many villages were destroyed following those raids, which was another piece of the puzzle of Nazi atrocities across Europe, across the German Europe of 1940-1945. The soldiers who brought death upon Distomo belonged to the 4th Brigade of the SS police. It was a division not built in order to fight the enemy at the front. Of course, there was no paramilitary gang, something that any German government should not be blamed for. No, it was an instrument, a tool used by the then German government, by Germany itself, and exercised policy, implemented the policy of the German Reich at that time. German Reich, which, legally speaking, was the predecessor of the legal entity we know now as the Federal Republic of Germany. This specific division of police, because of the Polizei Panzergrenadier, because we're talking about a police division, a police group. So this unit had a mission, which was to establish terror of this new order on the occupied lands in Europe. Their work was to kill, was to destroy. The places where they acted was sown with tombs and ruins. We cannot compare them with some kind of execution squad. It wasn't just a horde of barbarians. Behind every act of theirs, there was the rationale and the logic of terror, an ideology based on racial discrimination between people, an ideology that gave very relative value to those, to the life of those people who, unfortunately for them, belonged to the lower races. All these things, and I'd like to repeat that, was part of an official policy and executed by the administrative branch of a huge power of the time, Germany. A power which, along with other powers, created what we now call European civilization. Many years after those events, of course, many years, but it's a very small period of time compared to the historical trajectory of humanity, we feel a bit awkward. How did this thing happen? It wasn't it's not a sober academic quest. The history of peoples of every period is a political narrative, and this narrative includes processes, values, and principles, and these things belong both to the period where when the facts took place and in all other periods, because history is diachronic, is long-standing, like the Shakespearean plays or the Roman legacy or Marx's works. That's why there's no relativity in the work of historians who try to explain, to interpret human actions that come from completely different periods of time. That's why history is not something that might end as many would like to see back in the 1990s, or as the Nazi of the hyperhistoric or unhistoric Third Reich would like it to be. So Nazism was not the only source of barbarity and atrocity in the modern world. Many of its building blocks belonged to other periods of time. One might say that the achievement of Nazism was that it brought together everything evil in the legacy of humankind. Of course, this legacy included many evils like the colonial expansion of the 18th century and the enforcement of the Western lifestyle across the globe, of the capitalist method of production that was the matrix and the womb from which Nazism sprang. Racial distinction between people of higher culture, of higher civilization, and lower one, between races that belonged, that deserved having a high place in history and those who did not, laid the foundations for the Nazi philosophy. This philosophy came into light when the powerful social classes of the world needed it. Nazism was born in 1999, in 1919, in the aftermath of the bloody First World War. It was one of the consequences of said war, one of the creation, it was a creation of the policy of human attrition, and it was created in the front of the of war. Those mechanisms that undertook fighting against the competitors, those brought back to life aristocrats and kings of the Belle Epoque were swept away in the dunes of the Great War. The powerful ones, the wealthy ones, were left unprotected against societies that now doubted, revolutionary societies, suspicious societies against internal enemies, in other words. Political formations with military color were created in order to replace these verbose and grand elites. The black and color were the new colors. The black and red were the new colors. It wasn't just about amazing people. It was about intimidating and bringing terror on people. In 1918, in the period 1918 to 1919, we had the Freikorps and the direct descendants of stormtroopers, inspired by Rudolf, one of the grand ones who promoted Nazism after it was born. Those Nazi formations and schemes would define the life and death of other people. As a result of that, humans should have no access to the law, to justice, to the courts anymore. Out of the 25 points of the Nazi Party Articles of Association signed by Drexler, the first Führer of the Nazi Party, it was point 19 that reflected this brand new order of things. I quote, in Germany, no Roman law will apply within the program of our party. We will now have the German traditional law applying, which means, in other words, that the right of people, of all humans actually, to go through in trial pursuant to the crime they have committed before the same judge doesn't apply anymore. We will have another kind of law for those who are racially superior and another kind of justice for those who belong to an inferior race and for which we make a favor of allowing them to survive. In other words, very few came to realize the meaning of that Nazi stance at that time. Later on, when those ideas became political and military, were realized in political and military terms in the Second World War, people understood what they meant. There was no judge, there was no prosecutor, there was no resort to tribunals for the citizens of Distomo. There was no such alternative for the 60,000 Jewish fellow compatriots of ours who went to the camps of concentration. The same for the people in Chania, the same for the Birkenau or the Auschwitz prisoners or the Dachau ones. Those people were beyond the human law. They were subhumans for them. Very few understood after that the demographic engineering introduced by the Nazi theories. The debate on eugenics, about who deserves to live, who deserves to die, on the fate of people who are sick or ill, the cost of human life with respect to what this human life may offer to humanity was now something measured. And of course, now, as a result of trying to find the balance and to weigh the things, there was always someone who prevailed. The Nazis started killing people in villages. They started burning men and women and children within in our houses. They started using secondary and carbon monoxide in the furnaces in order to kill and burn people. So Nazi, in the name of eugenics, of course, this happened in other areas as well, and they exterminated all children born with issues, with conditions, for whom for Nazi did not deserve to live. So the cost of life became a criterion for who deserves to die and who deserves to live. The road to darkness, this is a term used by Joseph Corrant, was now fully open. The Second World War provided the opportunity for the things that Nazi introduced to become a criminal act with no precedent. The final solution was the outcome of a meeting of experts, of the so-called experts or the excellent ones, as we would call them in modern Greece. During the planning of the Barbarossa operation for the invasion in the USSR, it was very easily to think about killing 30 million people. It was a necessary killing in order to attain the nutritional balance or achieve dietary balance in Europe. When talking about dietary balance, we're talking about the well-being of the superior races. This sorting of people in camps of concentration led many of them to death. In the case of Distomo, and every Distomo was available to be burned down to ashes. Their people were to die because the local commander decided so, because he had the right of death and life over his own soldiers, over every human in the territory of his competence, as long as this person was beyond the Third Reich limits. Poverty, hunger, suffering, because we're talking about poverty currently. It wasn't a fight about numbers. It's about the concept of hunger in Europe. It's okay if somebody dies because of hunger, because this will improve the dietary balance of the remaining Nazi-ridden Europe. That's why there is no meaning in smart talk about the number of people killed. It wasn't that many, there were less, etc. So, allow me to close with the following: that today, in the context of what the mayor said, in the context of, let's say, laundering and abolishing certain policies, it's quite reasonable to have such ideas being brought back to the surface. So ideas of extermination, of annihilation, of war, of destruction, quite reasonably are back to our political vocabulary. It's a way to justify Nazism in another way. And this justification comes at various levels, one of which is the one we can see in our country. this effort to rewrite history between Greece and Germany, Poland and Germany, etc., etc. They try to take us out of the general context when trying to interpret things. We should not think what Nazis was. We should think about the culpability of this this Commander Fritz or the other Commander Fritz about the crime. This is the context of this program of memories for the occupation and other programs organized of this sort. And they try to convince us, the people of Distomo and all of us who suffered in Europe, that small donations and charity, which is to a certain extent an offense towards the fights, the struggles of our people for the fight not to bow down against those crimes against humanity. And they try to persuade us that this is the only thing to expect from the perpetrators. Of course, there is another thing. It's the I'm sorry, the moral recognition. Why should superior peoples commit crimes and go beyond them just by saying sorry, although the inferior ones cannot? So is this racial hierarchization in Europe meaning something? So let me end by saying that it is with personal and political bitterness that I see Greek colleagues of mine being involved in these and similar programs organized by the German government. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Margaritis. Let's move on now to Mr. Michalis Liperatos. He is a historian, PhD. He studied at the philosophical department of the Ioanna University. He completed his PhD under the political history department of Pantheon University, and he has written a series of important books. His works have been published in collective volumes in Greece and abroad. His interests are Greek history in the 19th century, the period between wars, and all the Greek history until the Greek dictatorship. He taught in the postgraduate course at the Pantheon University between 2016 and 2019. The title of his presentation is International Anti-Communism and Post-War Justification and the Waiving of the Second World War crimes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor for me that I was invited to talk to you in the framework of this conference and in the efforts for the war reparation. And I think it's high time we all remembered the atrocities and find a way to bring justice through these reparations. And I think that these kind of events are of paramount importance to keep memory alive. In May 2021, we had the relatives of the descendants of the massacre in Crete claiming justice. And I think that these are efforts that take place all over the world to change things in favor of the victims, something which has not always been the case. And this is based on fair relationships cultivated among states. And we should forget these relationships of superiority on the part of some states. Three were the pillars of the arguments in favor of the criminals when the international community tried to punish them. And the first argument that I was executing orders. But we saw that it's not just an order to massacre people, even in hostile areas. That is the Charter of Nuremberg, which was annexed in the London Agreement of 1945, provided that the hierarchy is not a justification for this crime regarding not only the officials, but the simple, the humble soldiers as well. Another excuse was the retaliation, that we did that in retaliation for what, for example, the partisans did to us. At the same time, no judge could accept only the punishment of some people. And excuses were omnipresent in all trials. But I think we had some case law that actually restore justice. And takes into consideration the outcome of the crimes committed that not justified by a simple order. And these were crimes considered against humanity per se, as provided for in the Geneva Convention of 1949. Crimes against people were including the armed forces that had been executed, and even the presence of the armed forces among civilians could not justify the atrocities and of the soldiers, as well as looting cannot be justified. The International Convention imposed imposed unfavorable opinions against all those who have committed these crimes, using the argument that they were attacked and that among the civilians were armed forces. We need to highlight that the war criminals cannot say that they were not aware of the crimes they had committed. They were aware of that from moment one. And in October 1941, they saw that the retaliation against specific people that had already been committed have been recognized as crimes of war. And in London, the exiled government had already suggested measures of punishment against all those who had committed these crimes. In summer 1942 and 1943, we had also warnings against the Germans for these crimes through the declaration of Moscow, saying that all those who had committed these crimes will be arrested and brought before justice. We need to underline that in order to avoid the conflict, Articles 251 and 52 of the protocol signed among the great powers clarified that even unfair actions and violent actions that took place among against the civilians, excuse me, cannot be justified as retaliation by the occupation forces. And these decisions were not scarce ones, but there were collective decisions made by groups of states. So these these atrocities are considered pure murders. So an eye for an eye is not the case here. Nevertheless, a lot of trials consider that as consider retaliation as an excuse for these war criminals. And another excuse that was brought before the court that was that whatever was done was in order to avoid the expansion of communism and in retaliation of the communist revolution, because if communism prevailed, even worse thing could have happened. And that is something that was prevailed in the ideology of Germany. Of course, Germans back then did not reveal that they were involved in various operations around the world. And they had in mind to destroy whole areas in order to limit the ability of the Allies to come to Greece and bring an end to the occupation forces of Germany. With the Convention of Geneva, it was known that retaliation was not allowed, and the British prisoners were supposed to be captured and their rights to be respected. All those atrocities, nevertheless, in that framework, were not justified by any convention. And in that sense, in Nuremberg, we see that during the trial, there were 7 principles introduced specializing the crimes and determining that violations against civilians and killing of civilians or war prisoners, the destruction of settlements, all of them were war crimes. With the Convention of Geneva in 1949, more clarifications were given about what a war crime was, when the Fourth Convention provided that atrocities against against hostages were not allowed. And when hostages, people were taken hostages, their rights should be respected. And in Nuremberg, we had similar examples regarding the atrocities that took place in Greece, despite the arguments of the perpetrators that they were executing their orders. And when at the end of the war was not enough, uh, for the retaliation of Germans when they were leaving the countries was justified as an attempt to avoid the spread of communism, even though we see that in these atrocities, the victims, the pure victims, were just civilians and not some kind of partisans who were trying to destroy the German army. After the end of Roosevelt and the polarization created in the international relations, a different climate was started to be cultivating regarding the Nazis' atrocities in order to raise awareness among the citizens of Europe. And in that way, some of the prosecutions stopped because right then the German had to play an important role as the last frontier against the Iron Curtain. So these kind of trials could not operate in favor of the German. As proven by a congressional report, which was fulfilled 63 years after the end of the war, only in 1998, the crimes of war started coming in the limelight again, because until then, the American state kept these crimes hidden, as I said earlier, in order to have the German role enhanced, as I said earlier, against the Iron Curtain. But after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the war crimes came again in the limelight, and 200,000 reports and the secret services had to arrest about 120,000 people accused for war crimes, among them some of the most renowned one. But after a while, some things changed again, because some of these people were cooperating with the secret services of the United States, especially when being in Russia, in order to give the United States information about what was happening there. So we can see that the Americans approached these things in a different way, occasionally promoting justice, and and some other times trying to avoid the revelation of events. And occasionally, the United States would offer asylum to war criminals in order to protect them against their war crimes. In 1945, the American state tried to recruit scientists in the framework of the Overcut project. 350 scientists, most of them ex-Nazis, were moved to the United States, and they cooperated with other scientists in the United States in the framework of the Paper Creek project. And we had an official of DSS and and a representative of the engineers who created the B-2 missiles, who were responsible for killing thousands of people. And those were used in Santander project of NASA. A lot of other criminals arrived in the United States in the framework of a project, and more than 400,000 Europeans became citizens of the United States by 1952. And in this framework, everybody would be accepted in the United States if declared to be against communism. That gave the opportunity to a lot of Nazis to flee to the United States just by declaring that they are anti-communist. As the Secret Services also mentioned, until 1953, the research for war criminals in the United States were inexistent. Only in 1978, in Immigration and Nationality Act, for the first time, it was decided to deport to Europe all those who were war criminals during World War II. In 1980, the Jewish Council started referring to specific names of Germans who committed crimes, and we saw that some of them have been recruited as agents of the CIA in Russia. The President Clinton signed in 1998 the Act of Revelation. So it took 58 years in order to be able to reveal the reports about the war criminals who had fled in the United States. In Greece, things moved in the same way as in the rest of the world, even though there was a committee that was created back then among 17 countries.
Ωστόσο, καμιά κρατική ελληνική υπηρεσία μετά την απελευθέρωση δεν έστελνε στοιχεία στο Υπουργείο Δικαιοσύνης. Παράλληλα με τη λευκή τρομοκρατία που
along with the so-called white terror, which was the beginning of the Greek Civil War, the establishment of the Greek Office for War Crimes was being postponed again and again until the president of the committee, Roger Anderson Wright, decided to threaten Greece internationally for this reluctance. Even Eisenhower asked urgently from Berlin to have Greek interpreters in order to have investigation of war crimes against Greeks. Under the Greek government, after a lot of pressure following the executive law of 384, decided to establish this office with 27 employees and one head. This committee would carry on investigations and complete files of cases. However, this agency was understaffed, had no resources, no translators, just secretaries. They didn't even have typewriters. With the competent ministers being against the operation, they finally compiled 380 files of cases until July 47, if I heard correctly, which were very similar one to another. In total, the Greek side lodged 1,831 cases for individuals, 911 Germans, 300 Italians, and 609 Bulgarians. Amongst which, it was Walter Blumen, the head, the commander of the Merlin Street HQs, which was the hell in Athens, who was not considered by the Greek court as a perpetrator, but the instigator of these torments. And the Nuremberg trial against Lichter, Skunter, Feisen, Hermann, Belz produced no results. Apologies, but we cannot listen to what the speaker is saying because there's a huge problem, an ongoing sound from his microphone. We apologize for that. And in 1953, all of them were allowed to go free. This also includes the Breuer brothers who were acquitted for the crimes in Crete. These people are the same, also infamous Schubert and the previous couple were executed in Crete. This guy was a slaughterer in Crete in Macedonia. He was accidentally arrested in Greece during his holidays. He was trialed. He denied to pledge his case, and in 1947 he was executed, if we heard correctly. These were all the people punished. All other lieutenants and generals in Crete, Zabe, who was the person responsible for the Distomo massacre, Brahma and others, after an application by the German state, they were imprisoned, and the Greek state actually paid them for the salaries they were supposed to receive during their time in prison. And following a series of maneuvering, they were released. The same for the head of the commission, the commander in the Distomo. The German state accused Greek ministers for not following up with a promise to provide amnesty to the Germans in prison. Andreas Toussis, the Greek judge, tried in his last effort to send all the cases to be tried at least in Germany. However, the German state secured acquittals, celebrating acquittals for them. The German courts asked Minister of Justice Papaspirou, while Nikos Belogiannis was being executed because of their responsibility, he was asked to abolish the Office of War Crimes. Actually, Zabel applied for the interruption of the case. The Germans wanted to proceed with the case in order to provide him with an acquittal. The problem of Zabel was how to sneak him out of Greece, because in the same period there was a trial for the Radinsky Sinan massacre, and there was a lot of reaction by abroad. So June 26th of 1953, he was set free. Germans received also some case files until 1956, just to stop the prosecution against these culprits and get them back to Greece, one of which was the slaughter of Jews in Thessaloniki, Mertens, who came to Greece on his own to find the gold of the Jews he has extracted from them, and he was arrested, and once again, the proud policy of our countries was highlighted. Nobody has to say that it was the same attitude by the Greek authorities to the Greek traitors, but it was even more funny that in 1980 that the Greek authorities were informed by Dizentoff, if I heard the name correctly, that the German head of SS in Distomo, Kurt Ricke, was identified, and all of the military in that massacre were identified during celebration organized for the Panzer Grenadier Group in Bavaria, in Bavaria. Mr. Liberatos, the case reached the Minister of Justice, it was brought to court, and the court decided that the case could not be tried because of the exemption law of 1959. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear professor. Now, the floor is to Dr. Edward Steli. He's a Czech historian, the writer, and the deputy head of the Ludis Memorial, and he is a graduate of the Karol Institute. He emphasized a lot on military history of the Czech Republic. One of his main research interests is the case of Lidice, the small town in the Czech Republic, where in June 10th, 1942, exactly 2 years before Distomo, one of the most well-known Nazi war crimes against humanity took place. He is the author of a book, and he is the head of the Lidice Memorial, the director of Lidice Memorial. Let us remember that Radus in France, Lidice and Distomo have a link between them, and they have this common thread that goes through their history because of the Nazi crimes. Mr. Steli, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in your conference. It's really excellent, this idea to unite the historians and the people which are united in the theme of the Nazi crimes during World War II. Thank you very much for 2 excellent presentations. And of course, thank you to the municipality of Distomo for the hospitality. So originally, I thought I could speak about Lidice, but the Lidice story, the destroying of the Lidice village by the Nazis is well known. And because the theme of our conference is crime without punishment, Nazi crimes against humanity in Europe, so I prepare a paper which is dedicated to the Bohuslav Echer, the man who was a Czechoslovak general, excellent lawyer, and now it's a completely forgotten person, not only in Europe, but even in the Czech Republic when he was born. That man was during the World War II member of the Czech exile army in Great Britain. He was Czech or Czechoslovak representative in a UN Commission for Investigation of War Crimes from 1942 till the end of the war. And from 1945, he was a Czech delegate to the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg. What's interesting, this man was the first person who defined concept of the crimes against humanity. He came with it in April 1944, and his concept became a nucleus for a further Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 in Paris. So he participated in work on a commission or UN Commission for Investigation of War Crimes, especially in 1942. And what's interesting, even in 1942, 1943, there was no clear idea in Allied countries for the first, what crimes to prosecute, secondly, what courts to appoint, and thirdly, who stand trial from the German or Japanese war crimes. Only one thing was they started work on it was original crime was a Nazi attack on peaceful nations. It was an original war crime, the Nazi attack, the crime of the war. But in World War II, similar problems were in World War I, but in World War II there came completely new problems. There was a new character of the war, so total war. And in the war participated organization on which we could look as on the criminal organization. It was SA, SS, Gestapo. So, and especially the German Third Reich came with the state-organized banditry or terrorism. In October 1943, started work the London International Assembly as an assassination of many experts. And Escher presented there this two important motions. One was the superior orders and German war criminals. In this mention, he labeled NSDAP, SS, SA, and Gestapo as a criminal organizations. And what was interesting, he said that the members of the organizations became the members from his own decision, and they can't say that he received the orders from his superior persons, and he can't be defended by it. Secondly, the months after, in April 1943, the Escher came with another motion. It was a criminal liability of the heads of the Axis-states, especially that these people, especially with the attack on the peaceful nations, this attack, the crime of the war is a really crime and must be punished by the court, not by some political assembly. On 10 October 1944, during the plenary session of the United Nations of War Crime Commission, Escher put forward the minority report by Dr. Escher on whether the preparation of initiation of the war should be considered crimes within the competence of the United Nations Commission for the Investigation of the War Crimes, in which he thoughtfully discussed all legal authorities, agreements and analogies in order to argue that, for the firstly, the preparation and initiation of a world war is a crime, not only in moral or historical sense, but also according to criminal codes of the attacked countries and the crimes against mankind according to general principles of international law. Secondly, the heads of states, members of their governments, and the high commands that prepared and started the Second World War have committed crimes for which they can be tried by criminal courts of the countries attacked. Thirdly, the states with legal authority to judge them can delegate these powers to an allied criminal court. Such a court should be entitled to act to assume an instrument of international justice in accordance with the general principles of international and criminal law. The problem is lack of legal authority of the part of the United Nations Commission of Investigation of War Crimes, which is not authorized to include the perpetrators of the current war in the list of the war criminals. Should any doubt arise, Etcher proposed that the Commission should recommend that the governments of the United Nations extends its authority in its basic issue and empower it to list its wars organization as a war criminals. What's very important, on 13 March 1945, Etcher put before the legal committee the memorandum entitled Criminal Personal Responsibility of Member of the German Nazi Government, which stated, firstly, the being as NSDAP members, the officials of the Nazi government were unconditionally committed to pursuing all the goals of the party, including those which were criminal. Secondly, they joined that government with the criminal intention to pursue the criminal aims of the Nazi party, and joining if they committed an act which can be described as conspiracy under Anglo-Saxon criminal law or as the crimes of banditry under Soviet, French, and partly also Czechoslovak criminal law. Thirdly, being members of the German government, they were accomplices of Adolf Hitler, and each of them, in his purview, committed numerous crimes in an outwardly legitimate manner by issuing various edicts, decrees, regulations, etc. Therefore, all members of the Nazi government are liable, as any member of a criminal band would be liable for all acts committed by that band in accordance with the principles that every act committed with a collective intention shall be ascribed to all members of that band. These motions of Etcher became a basis of the Charter of the International Military Tribunal and became a part of its agreement, where we can find crimes against peace, war crimes against humanity. What to say in conclusion? General Etcher helped the legal experts which grappled during the Second World War. They are grappled with many problems, namely, as I already mentioned, what crimes should be punished, what perpetrators should stand trial, and whenever a state or party officials can be prosecuted for something that was perfectly in line with the totalitarian legal order they served. But I think we can believe it's a time to remember the main principle that Bohuslav Etcher so often emphasized in dealing with his friends and foes. Please, never allow the law to kill justice. Thank you for your attention.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε, κύριε Στέλη. Να περάσουμε στο...
Συγγνώμη, λίγο έχω ένα πρόβλημα με το ίντερνετ εδώ πέρα, γιατί έχουμε...
Deeply sorry, I had a problem with my internet connection, and now I participate through my mobile phone. I couldn't have the chance to attend the whole speech. I would like, nevertheless, to thank you very much for being here and for honoring us with your presence, Mr. Steli. And next year, you will be invited to come to Greece, and we will have a representation in Lintice for you. Thank you very much. And now we will go to Michel Moravid, the Director of National Park of Peace Museum of Sant'Anna di Estrada.
Κύριε Μοραμπίτο, πρέπει να ανοίξει το
You have to open your microphone.
Could you kindly turn on your microphone, please?
It's a pleasure for me to be here this evening I'm the director of the National Park of Peace and the Historical Museum of Resistance of Sant'Anna di Stazzema. Sant'Anna di Stazzema is one of the most important places in European martyrdom, a world symbol of violence against civilians that links the community of Stazzema to many places in the world. Many things bring Sant'Anna to these places. The cruelty with which this massacre were carried out, the contempt for life that characterized the killing of women or people and children, but also the difficulty of doing justice for those victims. For those victims of Sant'Anna massacre in Italy, justice arrived almost 60 years after the facts. In Germany, there has never been a trial against the killers who were able to live their lives as respected and free citizens. For those other places, justice never came. The Italians were also occupiers in Greece, and it's with deep pain and sense of anguish that I speak at this conference. It was not the case of Distomo, but in the Domenicon, the Italians were guilty of those facts, and also for the massacre no one has ever paid. We remember the pride of the Mayor of Distomo, who, from the microphone of the Auschwitz monument of Sant'Anna, asked for justice for the victims. It was 2 years ago, and that appeal still resonated strongly. The Sant'Anna massacre is one of the best-known events in the Nazi-fascist massacres against the civilian population in the years of the German occupation of the Italian territory. The massacre of Sant'Anna di Stazzema is part of a path of massacre masterfully reconstructed from the Atlas of the Nazi and Fascist massacre, a project wanted and financed in the context of an agreement between the Italian government and that of the Federal Republic of Germany. They first created a joint historical commission with the mandate to elaborate a critical analysis of the history and common experience during the Second World War, and to contribute to the creation of a new culture of memory. Therefore, the government of the Federal Republic of Germany financed this research within the Italo-German Fund for the Future, promoted in collaboration by the National Institute for the History of the Liberation Movement in Italy and the National Association of Partisans of Italy, which made it possible to define a complete picture of the episode of violence against civilians committed by the German army and the fascist allies in Italy between 1943 and 1945. The massacre of Sant'Anna di Stazzema is a symbol of violence against civilians in terms of dimension, methods, and cruelty. It's a part of a particular phase of a war situation that opens with the retreat of the German army on the so-called Gothic Line, in areas of the great strategic importance, such as the mountains near Versilia, the Alps mountains or the Lunigiana. The presence of numerous partisan formations represented a real problem for the Germans. This 16th Panzer Grenadier Division of the SS arrived in the area in these days, commanded by General Simon, a Nazi fanatic made up of young soldiers, but with a corps of officers and not commissioned officers, strongly ideologized and tempered by the previous experience in the Nazi concentration system or in a war operation, including extermination of Jews and civilians in occupied Poland. The Massacre of Sant'Anna is a part of an operation cycle of fight against partisan gangs that begins in the early August of 1944, hitting various areas of Pisa with violence and massacre, continues in Versilia, that invests after Sant'Anna di Stazzema, the Upper Alps, beyond the Apennines Mountains in the great operation of Monte Sole, against the population of 3 municipalities, Marzabotto, Grizzana, and Monzuno, in which in 29 September to 5th October, they were killed about 1,800 people. In this operational context, the Sant'Anna massacre regains its tragic significance. There are paper operations aimed against the partisans, which are in reality configured as terrorist action to clean up the territory. Real massacre of all those that were found within the limited area as one of the reclaimed, considered partisans. In the small Catholic village, which make up the Sant'Anna, there were about 400 inhabitants and several hundred people from all over Versilia, but also from more distant places such as La Spezia, Genoa, Piombino, Naples, Livorno, who had taken refuge in Sant'Anna after the displacement orders issued by the German commands in various locations, and to escape to the aerial bombardments that hammered the coast. A small town became the protagonist of a beautiful history of hospitality, which today is most significant in a moment in which many people are fleeing a situation of hunger and war in search of a place to find hope for a dignified existence. The town of Sant'Anna was considered a safe haven because the Germans had indicated it as a place where a population forced to abandon their homes could converge. At the end of the day, about 500 women, old people, and children were killed. The Sant'Anna di Stazzema massacre remained without justice for over 50 years. For years, the fights of the responsibilities of the massacre were hidden by the Italian authorities. The military court of La Spezia commanded 50 years ago 10 SS men for their responsibilities for the massacres, and also for the modalities of their conduct in carrying out orders. For 50 years, the institution have forgotten these small communities lost in the Versilia woods, dropping the appeals to justice witnessed by telegrams, letters to the local administration sent to the central authorities, so that Sant'Anna is not forgotten. Appeals that fell on different years. For the sacrifice of his citizens, so that the site of the massacre could become a warning for the younger generation and a place for reflection on the horrors of war, the Italian Parliament made Sant'Anna di Stazzema the seat of the National Park of Peace. After the post-war oblivion, the process of the 15 years ago, the Sant'Anna di Stazzema National Park of Peace has taken on a symbolic connotation that goes beyond its geographical borders, ideally embracing all the places committed to the safeguarding of meanings, historical and moral, that Sant'Anna expresses. It has become a symbol of memory and a space for reflection on the rights and values of peace, justice, dialogue, and respect between peoples and individuals. Every year, it organizes national and international events, permanent and temporary exhibition, conference. Especially in the last 10 years, the National Park of Peace has grown a lot, both in terms of the offer to visitors and in terms of the educational activities, both in terms of visibility and recognition. In recent years, recognition has grown with the presence of numerous institutional representatives. The National Park of Peace, in carrying out its activities, is inspired by the series of principles and values that inspire the Constitutional Charter of Italy and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, our civil life in democratic societies. Those principles and values that arise from the tragedies of the Second World War, from the awareness of the works of suffering, was necessary to restore Europe to freedom from the oppression and the totalitarianism of this cycle. In fact, when we talk about democracy, we are not referring only to a set of institutions, but also to a general conception of life, of human, of history. A democracy certainly needs suitable institutions, but it does not survive if these institutions are not fed by firm values. The National Party of Peace tends towards to the affirmation of a universe of ideals and values, opposite to the totalitarianism. Our mission as National Party of Peace is to act on today, on contemporaneity. For this reason, on the 20th August of last year, as part of the demonstration for the anniversary of the massacre, the Mayor of Sant'Anna di Stazzema launched the idea of a popular initiative law proposal against Nazi and fascist propaganda and against the sale and the production of objects with fascist and Nazi symbols. The question they often ask us is whether the current rules are not enough, and the answer lies in what happens every day. The bill section, those we propagate the image and contents of the fascist party or the German National Socialist Party, or their ideologies, even if only to the production, distribution, dissemination, sale of goods, images, a symbol. The closure of the legislature is not allowed to achieve the result of the transformation into law. Today, we are witnessing to the proliferation of images that recall to the fascism and Nazism, and which made violence, discrimination, the suppression of freedom the distinct threat. Having underestimated the return of symbols and propaganda, especially online, which refer to these ideologies, has meant to, in the last 10 years, that the number of those who thinks that the Shoah never occurred from 3 to 50% in Italy. That there are more than 20% of the population declaring that Mussolini was a great leader who made a few mistakes. While it's not a common belief that fascism has also done good things. Fascism and Nazism survive in the intimidation, in the beating, in the ideology of oppression that pervades social network. The threats to journalists who try to discover the world of neo-fascism, neo-Nazism, in Barney Stadium and in Westall against black footballers. They survive in indifference to the dead at the sea during adventurous journeys, refugee camps at the borders of our Europe. We have been overwhelmed by an enthusiasm that pushes us to ever greater commitment. The world of association, anti-fascist, culture, volunteering is mobilizing in support of the bill. Today, more even, it's important to commit all together against fascism and against this symbol. We need a new law, and we need it now. On 29th of April, the Mayor of Sant'Anna di Stazzema delivered the 20 and 50,000 signatures to the Chamber of Deputies, and the proposal was announced by the Camera of Deputies, or the Chamber of Deputies. We hope it will be a law soon. Thanks to the magistrates like Marco De Paulis, the trial in La Spezia gave us justice. In Germany, the lawyer Gabriele Haneke tried to prosecute this criminal, but we found insurmountable resistance. Today, the commitment to memory must be transformed into a commitment for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Morabito. Οι κοινωνίες να μην ξεχάσουν ποτέ, όπως είπε ο κύριος Morabito.
Yes, as Mr. Morabito has said, societies should never forget. And now we will give the floor to Maria Anna Osuleska, Diplomacy of Remembrance, Auschwitz, Birkenau Memorial and Museum. Ms. Osolinska, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the invitation to the conference. The topic of my presentation is keeping the memory as a key to the future, remembrance at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum. So I will rather talk about our present activities. And I have a PowerPoint presentation, so just please give me a second to open it. One more second. Right. I go to the beginning. Okay. Yes, I start with a very short information about the history of the former German Nazi concentration and extermination camp Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was established by the Germans in 1940 in the suburbs of the city of Oświęcim, which, like other Polish territories, was occupied during the Second World War by the German Third Reich. Initially, Poles were imprisoned and died in the camp. Later on, Soviet prisoners of war, Roma, and prisoners of many other nationalities. Since 1942, the camp became the site of the largest mass murder in the history of humanity, carried out on European Jews as part of the German plan for the total extermination of the Jewish nation. The majority of the Jews deported to Auschwitz, men, women, and children, were sent to death in the Birkenau gas chambers immediately upon arrival. A total of at least 1.1 million people, mostly Jews, about 900,000, were killed in Auschwitz by the Germans. At the end of the war, the assessment, in an attempt to cover up the traces of their crimes, began destroying the gas chambers, crematoria, and other facilities, as well as burning documents. Prisoners capable of walking were evacuated deep into the Reich. Those who remained in the camp were liberated by soldiers of the Red Army on the 27th of January, 1945. In 1947, there was established a museum in the area of the former camp. The memorial was included in the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1979. For the word, Auschwitz is a symbol of terror, genocide, and the Holocaust. It is now a place which we all are responsible to preserve it. It is very important to remember the history of Holocaust because, of course, we should remember the history. Through the remembrance, we commemorate the victims of the Holocaust. We should learn from the history so that it never happens again. And as Marian Turski, one of the Holocaust survivors, said during the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camp, Holocaust did not fall from heaven. So it started, in fact, with small steps, with small signs of intolerance, or small signs of violence, which on the beginning, one might say, it's nothing very important, or it's just a small sign. But in fact, we never should stay indifferent. We are obliged to react yes, we are obliged not to be indifferent in the face of any kind of intolerance and violence. Through the history of Holocaust, we can also learn what man is able to do to another man. And I think that to understand the mankind, we also have to know the history of Holocaust. So the history of the largest mass murder in the history of humanity. I would like to present the numbers of visitors. This is the comparison of the numbers of visitors in the last 20 years. You can see it's growing every year, except of 2020, but I think it's understandable for everybody. In 2019, we had over 2,300,000 visitors. And yes, except of the pandemic time, it is the number of visitors is growing. These are visitors from all over the world. This slide shows how the visitors are divided into different continents. Of course, the most visitors are coming from Europe, North America, over 200,000. And visitors by country in 2019, only the 30 top countries. Poland, we have almost 400,000. United States is 120,000. Germany is on the 5th location. Greece, as you can see, has around 10,000 visitors in 2019. Although I must say we don't have any information about the place of origin of over 700,000 visitors. Over 90% of visitors are visiting the memorial with a guide. And the guides are presenting the history in 22 languages. We have around 300 guides. They can guide through the memorial in 22 languages, which is very important that people understand the history and the story, that they hear it in their own language, because then they understand it the best. Auschwitz, Birkenau, nowadays we have a huge conservation department. We have a huge international center for education about Auschwitz and the Holocaust, where we organize lots of workshops, also dedicated for concrete groups of people. Workshops, conferences. We have a very important research center, art collection, which this is a collection of art which was made by the prisoners during their time at the camp. We have a very big archive, publishing house. We have books in different languages, and diplomacy of remembrance, which I will explain to you in a few minutes. Yes, so we are having exhibitions, workshops, different kind of meetings, different kind of visitors. This is what I wanted to show you, is the building in front of the picture is so-called Old Theater, which is a place where the International Center for Education about Holocaust and Auschwitz is located. This building was built before the Second World War, and 2004 it was given by the city Oświęcim to the memorial, and after the renovation it was opened just 1 year ago. It's a huge place where conferences can take place, any kind of education, so it's very modern. There are few conferences room, libraries, readings rooms, and so on. So we have except of the pandemic time. It was opened in the pandemic time, but generally it is a place where any kind of educational projects can take place. We are active, very active online, because it is important to be present in the whole world. So at our website, you can find online lessons. Even today, there is one new lesson presented on the website. It's the new lesson is about inhabitants of Oświęcim during the occupation. There are Panorama Auschwitz.org is a place when you can virtual visit the memorial. We are very active on social media. We have over 1.15 million followers on Twitter. And there is a new project, which such an application on handies, which will start by the end of the year 2021. This is an application which will allow to make a virtual visit through the museum with a guide. This is the most important thing by this application, but it also allows to make a reservation at the museum, to buy some books and so on. But the most important is a virtual visit, just using your handy, but it will be live with a guide. And Memoria is a monthly newspaper, monthly online paper. This is a print screen of the newest title. It's a monthly magazine with the goal to present international activities on the topic of memory and education about the Holocaust. In English version, the English version has already about 15,000 readers. I must say it's quite new. We have this Memoria paper magazine for about 2 years. And just to show you one inside page, it's this, and I can say about this exhibition. It's a huge exhibition, Auschwitz not long ago, not far away. It's an exhibition which was under international organization with international group of historian experts. It's in fact organized by a Spanish company, but the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum is very strong participating in it. We gave to the exhibition around 600 objects, but of course there are many other institutions which are engaged into this huge topic. The exhibition was already presented in Madrid for about 13 months and was seen by around 600,000 visitors. After that, it was presented in New York, in south part of Manhattan, in the Museum for Jewish Heritage, also around 1 year long. And in a few days, on the 14th of June, this exhibition will be opened in Kansas City. So it is a really big project. And Diplomacy of Remembrance. The mission of Diplomacy of Remembrance, which is quite a new department at our museum, is to disseminate knowledge about Auschwitz and the Holocaust as a warning to the contemporary world. We operate in the fields of culture, art, and education, protection of freedom and human rights. I think that together we can counteract racism and hatred and intolerance and participate in building responsible, committed, and sensitive societies. So the goals are to foster the diplomacy of remembrance and to propagate the memory of the Holocaust and victims of Auschwitz, as well as to develop among societies the values of democracy, commitment, tolerance, and responsibility. We invite people, institutions, organizations to actively participate in the activities of the international community, building the memory of the extermination of European Jews, the tragedy of Poles, Roma, Soviet prisoners of wars, and other groups of victims. This is just a very illustrative slide which shows how many visitors we had in 21st century, but it shows how many people never had been at Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and never will be. So the idea is of diplomacy of remembrance to reach people there in their local towns, places. So together with the Auschwitz-Birkenau Institute, which is a foundation founded around two years ago, we try to find people and organizations to cooperate with. We are also searching for honorary ambassadors and honorary consuls of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial. And through such a network, we try to build such a network of people, of these honorary consuls and ambassadors, and people around them engaged into promoting the values of democracy and yes, and so we are working on building this huge huge network. And next. So this is, in fact, yes, the idea of the diplomacy of remembrance is integration around the historical remembrance, deportations, extermination, and the survivors. Yes, the diplomacy of remembrance is, so we are building the network of people. We already, although because despite the pandemic, we have some success in last year. There is we have new consuls, one honorary consul of Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial in Spain and one in United States. In Spain, we already have also such a local institute, Auschwitz-Birkenau Institute in Spain, which is very active, which is organizing some exhibitions and workshops for students and for teachers. So this is how we are working. And we believe that if memory was only history, it would be unproductive. So we try to, history is a lesson and we have to put it into present days, yes, we shouldn't stay indifferent seeing any type of violence. And I think this is our goal, to make people be active and engaging in any type of activities who prevent the racism, violence, and anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε, κυρία Οσολίνσκα.
We would like to thank you, Mrs. Osolinska. I would like to thank all the speakers. I will give the floor to Mayor Mr. Stathas, the mayor of Distomo, Arachov, and Antikyr. I think that it was an exceptional day, especially our last speakers. I have visited Santana and Auschwitz myself, so I'm part of the experience they offer. I am rather moved for what they are doing and what we do all together, because with what all of us do, keep memory alive. I would like to thank Michele, Maria, and Edward. In summer 2019, I was in Santana. I had visited that. What I need to tell you is no fascism anymore. And hopefully we won't have any war now or in the future to prevent humanity for experiencing such atrocity. The most important thing is those who have committed crime against humanity should pay, and Germany, for the time being, hasn't. And this is what is at stake for all of us who keep memory alive, that we need to bring justice to the victims, to the massacred, and to the generations to come. Next year, hopefully, we will be all together. We will invite you to Distomo and have an experience yourselves about how many people were massacred, pregnant women, babies, infants massacred. It is a Holocaust for us too. We have the remains, the bones of the massacred in the mausoleum, and each of the dead has a special box dedicated to him, her, and we have started preserving these remains. We identify the stories behind these people, behind the victims. Quite recently, when we had this conservation effort, we saw the skeleton of a woman who was pregnant, and we could see the bones of her baby in her belly. So she was massacred along with her baby. So we can rewrite and identify the stories behind the remains of the victims. Thank you once again for attending this session, and hopefully next year we will be all of us together and have the opportunity to exchange points of view. And of course, we will meet again in Lidice, in Santana, in Auschwitz, and all of us have the obligation to work together and not allow people to forget. Good evening, everyone. See you tomorrow.